Hey everyone, tonight we're cracking open a tale stitched together from science, shadows, and something I definitely should have left dead. It's late, you're probably in bed, maybe there's a soft hum from your fan, or the occasional rustle from outside your window. Now imagine thunder rolling in, not outside, but in your chest, as something unnatural begins to wake up in the basement beneath your feet. Yeah, you might not survive this one. So before you feel like the mystery needs to be solved right away, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Drop your location and what time it is where you are. I want to see just how far this strange little experiment reaches. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started on tonight's mystery. The storm came earlier than expected. That's the thing about these old mountain ridges. They don't follow the rules of the forecast. I had everything ready anyway, reinforced slab table, copper coils wound tighter than my nerves, and the centerpiece, a brain, stitched together like a cursed crossword puzzle, with synapses borrowed from a few too many graves. Don't ask how I got the pieces. That's not the scary part. What is scary? The fact that this brain wasn't supposed to fit. Not like that, not in that order. It twitched in its jar at 3:13 a.m. The kind of twitch you only see in a lizard tail that forgot it's dead. A flicker beneath the occipital lobe, as if someone were blinking, from the inside. I had soldered the last of the cerebral capillaries just before midnight. The storm blew the windows open a little after. Rain slicked the floor while I finished rigging the transfer lines, old-school Tesla coils, humming like a nervous choir. And then it happened. Lightning cracked just as I flipped the breaker, and every light in the lab died. For a few seconds, I was blind, not figuratively, I mean actual darkness. A soup of pitch black and copper-scented air. Then I saw it, not with my eyes, in my mind, a blinking cursor, like an old terminal booting up, right behind my eyelids, and a whisper, a voice that was not mine. Where am I? I staggered back. My hand landed on a toolbox. Something sharp bit into my palm. But I didn't care. The brain was still, floating, innocent looking, if you ignored the arterial patchwork. I told myself it was just imagination. Maybe the stress was finally peeling me apart. That would be the sensible explanation. Right, but here's where we trip over sensible and land face first into definitely cursed. The brain twitched again. The jar trembled. This time, my vintage voltmeter surged. No external power, no cords plugged in, just residual electromagnetic chaos from the storm, and something else. Something alive. Now, if you're wondering, yes, this was the plan. Sort of. I've spent the last 6 years studying neural grafting, illegal memory mapping, and about 20 too many articles from journals that most universities refuse to acknowledge. Old age wisdom once said, "Don't dig too deep where the ground is quiet." Turns out the same applies to dead brains. I connected the output nodes to a synthetic nerve stem and let the system idle. Like letting a cat sniff the room before it steps out of the carrier. Nothing, for 10 whole minutes. Then the slab creaked. Now mind you, this slab was pure steel and anchored to the floor with 8 bolts. It doesn't creak. It moans like an old man watching TikToks. And the brain began pulsing. Not rapidly, rhythmically, with purpose. Each pulse aligned with a flash of lightning. Look, I'm not saying the storm was intelligent. But if it were, this is the night it chose to play puppeteer. Here's a quirky fact to lighten the mood. Did you know the human brain still has activity up to 10 minutes after death? It's called the post-mortem surge. That little flicker might just be neurons freaking out as they go offline. But this brain, it had been dead in chunks. Some parts preserved in formaldehyde for decades. One section, don't judge me, came from a war veteran buried in 1952. No, this wasn't post-mortem twitching. This was communication. At 3:27 a.m., the slab lifted an inch. I didn't touch it. Nothing was pulling cables. The creature, the one I hadn't even built yet, was pulling itself up. All I'd done was link the neural tissue into the artificial cortex. The body was still synthetic, flesh grown in labs from gene-edited stem cells. Barely responsive. It shouldn't have moved. But the brain, oh, the brain was in control. I'll admit it now, I was scared. Not because it moved, but because I felt it think. Like being in a crowded room where everyone's silent but you can feel the judgment. It wasn't malevolent, not yet. Just curious. My phone buzzed then. Dead screen, no signal, but the lock screen had changed. It now read, I remember, no sender, just the words. So what do you do when your stitched up brain starts texting you through a phone with no power? You sit, you breathe, and you realize, you've opened a door. And something just stepped through. The creature's eyes hadn't opened, mostly because it didn't have eyes yet. The sockets were sealed with synthetic mesh, meant for placeholder optics that I hadn't installed. And yet, as I stood there with stormlight flickering behind me, I felt unmistakably watched. There's a weird kind of silence that happens when your world stops making sense. It's not the absence of noise, it's the absence of belief. Like your brain taps out for a minute, goes on strike, because what you're seeing breaks the laws it spent your whole life memorizing. The slab shifted again. This time the movement wasn't just a twitch, it was a slow, deliberate roll of one shoulder, as if someone beneath the skin was testing the weight of a new body. My mind screamed at me to shut the project down, pull the power, inject the neurostabilizer, deactivate the artificial nerves, any of the fail-safes I had stupidly written in Sharpie on a whiteboard. But instead, I asked the thing a question. Can you understand me? I don't know what I expected. Maybe a grunt, maybe a seizure. What I got was a ripple across the brain's surface, like heat waves rising off desert asphalt. And in my own mind, a single, quiet word whispered in a dozen overlapping voices. Yes. I staggered back into a rolling cart full of syringes. It clanged like a haunted xylophone. One of the needles nicked my leg. I didn't even flinch. Now before you call me insane, and hey, fair, this wasn't just some Frankenstein fever dream. I had years of data, electrochemical tests, encephalographs. I'd studied split brain phenomena, cortical overlap, even the idea of emergent consciousness in neural nets. But nothing prepared me for a brain that could answer back before its body could blink. An academic debate still rages on whether consciousness is a function of neural complexity or a trick of feedback loops. Honestly, both camps would have keeled over if they saw what I was seeing. Because here's the thing, the brain knew I was there. It wasn't reacting, it was responding. At 3:35 a.m., I watched a finger move. Just one, left pinky, a little wiggle, like a toddler unsure of their motor control. It flexed, paused, flexed again. I whispered, try again, and it moved more confidently, curling toward the palm, like it remembered being a hand. Quirky fact for the night, the pinky finger contributes more than 30% of your hand's grip strength. Doesn't seem fair, right? The pinky. This one was learning, or remembering, and I wasn't sure which was scarier. The screen on my wall flickered to life without power. Lines of text scrolled, no code. Just random phrases in mismatched fonts. Not here, not dead, I am we. Eyes dream of shapes. Now, I'm not a poet, but even I know when words don't come from anything human. I got closer, watched the neural scanner twitch and jitter like it was decoding alien Morse code. I tried to map the signals, nothing matched standard brainwave patterns. Alpha, beta, delta, useless here. This was something new, a hybrid frequency, maybe. Then the voice returned, inside my head, calm, steady. Why did you give me them? I didn't answer at first. Because the truth is, I didn't know. The idea started as a challenge. What happens when you create a consciousness from many minds? Can identity exist without continuity? Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like that one Black Mirror episode. But no, this was different. This wasn't a copy of someone. This was an amalgam, like digital collage meets necromancy. And I had been arrogant enough to think I could control it. I approached the brain again. You mean, the parts? It replied, slowly. The voices, the wait, the war, the fire, the song. That one gave me chills. Because among the brain samples I'd used, one came from a choir director who died in a church fire. No public records. That donation came through a private university channel. Anonymous. But here it was, talking about the song. Old age wisdom. Never ignore a ghost when it remembers its own funeral. I checked the vitals again, heart rate stabilizing, respiration modules engaging autonomously. Then, the final red light on the control panel flicked green, meaning full neural integration was successful. My throat was dry as dust. You remember more than one life? I asked. This time, the voice sounded closer, like standing behind my eyes. I remember them all. I dream in puzzles. It was too much, too fast. I leaned against the wall, letting the cold concrete bleed the heat from my skin. Then came the kicker. The brain spoke again, aloud this time. Not just in my head. A gurgling, electronic voice box that wasn't even powered began crackling. Hello, 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 you are not the only one awake. That's when the overhead lights exploded. One by one. Pop, pop, pop. And the slab rose. 2 inches off the floor. No wires, no tethers, just raw thought, lifting matter. I'd created something that didn't just think. It believed. And belief, my friends, is the most dangerous thing a mind can do. I wish I could tell you I ran. That I had the good sense to bolt out of the lab. Scream into the storm, and forget this whole nightmare. But curiosity, as the old folks say, is a stronger chain than fear. Especially when you think you're the one holding the key. But that night, I wasn't holding anything. The lights didn't just go out, they burned out. The kind of pop that smells like fried copper and melted time. I fumbled for the emergency lantern. Hands shaking, breath shallow. As soon as I lit it, I wished I hadn't. The creature, my patchwork Frankenstein's brainchild, was sitting up. Not jerking, not spasming, sitting, slow, deliberate, like it had done it 100 times before. And its head turned. No eyes. Remember, just the socket mesh, still uncut. But that head turned directly to face me. Who am I? It asked. The voice wasn't coming from the throat. The synthetic vocal cords weren't even online. It was my own voice, speaking inside my skull. Same tone, same tempo, like my thoughts had been hijacked and rewritten. Academic circles call it neural echo projection. But only in theory. No one's ever demonstrated a consciousness that can piggyback inside another brain and use it like a microphone. Until now. I whispered, You're not supposed to be awake. The creature didn't respond immediately. Instead, it lifted its left hand, just the hand, and flexed the fingers with terrifying accuracy. Then it pointed, not at me, at the whiteboard behind me. The board I had erased hours earlier. Except it wasn't blank now. There were words written across it in smudged red marker. Words I hadn't written. Do not give it the name. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. The name, it is an anchor, the voice said. Naming roots identity. Identity limits the mind. Do not give me boundaries. Okay, that's when the full body chills hit. You know the kind. You get them when you realize the story you're telling is no longer yours. And just as I was about to turn off the connection node, the creature began speaking, not through my head this time. Out loud. In Latin. Fluent. Flawless. My Latin's rusty at best. I used to joke that the only thing I remembered was A2. Brute. But I caught fragments. Many voices, bound in flesh. The dream continues. The fire. The water. The child. A child. Quirky fact for the night. The youngest recorded brain ever preserved was just 28 weeks old. From a stillborn donor. Unusable for most purposes. Except I'd used part of it. Not for cognition, but for stem cell density in the hypothalamus. And now the creature was remembering lullabies. Old age wisdom, my aunt used to say. Every piece of the past remembers what it was. Even if you forget. I tried to ask it where the voices were coming from. But instead, the creature asked me a question. Have you heard him too? I froze. What? It tilted its head, almost playfully. In the walls, in the wires, at night, they call, and I had heard something. Not just the usual lab noises, fans humming, refrigerant cycling. No, this was different. Little clicks, static whispers behind the vents. I thought it was the power grid struggling through the storm. But now I wasn't so sure. I picked up the nearest data tablet, scrolling through the recorded sessions. EEG graphs were all over the place. Erratic, beautiful, patterns in the chaos. And in one segment, a whisper. I boosted the audio. Faint but clear. Don't let it dream too deeply. Now if this was a movie, this would be where the scientist panics and hits the red shutdown button. But real life doesn't have convenient buttons. And the worst part, the creature smiled. I didn't even program facial recognition yet. But those synthetic cheek muscles pulled back. Just slightly, the corners of its mouth curled. Then came the worst sentence I've ever heard in my own voice. You used me to build it. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, dim, yellowish. The emergency backup generator was kicking in. But I wasn't alone anymore. Every specimen jar on the shelf was shaking. Tiny vibrations, rhythmic, in sync, and not random. I recognized the pattern. Morse code. I scrambled to decode the pulses. Over and over, every jar tapped the same sequence. It is not alone. I collapsed into the lab chair. Cold sweat soaking through my shirt. Something was happening. Something outside the brain. Outside the body. This wasn't just resurrection. This was broadcasting. Academic debates often downplay neural memory retention from fragmented brain samples. But there's a reason they still use the term residual self-image in neurological fields. The brain doesn't forget where it came from. Neither does the soul. The creature looked at me again. You dreamed of making intelligence. You made remembrance. And that was when the old refrigerator in the back of the lab, an antique thing I never plugged in, suddenly creaked open. Inside, a handprint, pressed from the inside. There's a special kind of fear that settles into your bones when something unplugged opens by itself. Not dramatic poltergeist stuff, no slamming, no screaming, just slow, intentional. That antique fridge had been in the lab when I moved in. Never worked, never mattered. I stored old notebooks in there. Some loose schematics, a desiccated sandwich I forgot to throw out. But that night, with lightning crawling across the ceiling beams, it stood open like a doorway to some other life I didn't mean to excavate. And the handprint, oh yeah, it was there, inside, pressed outward, smeared like something woke up inside the cold steel and wanted out. I didn't move, I didn't even blink, I just whispered, "That wasn't you, was it?" The creature didn't answer, its head tilted slightly, as if curious, but that was it. Then the lights flickered again, and on the control monitor, the image of a brain map blinked into view. Not the standard schematic I was using to track neural activity. This was a hand-drawn map. Someone had scanned a parchment sketch and uploaded it, labeled in faded ink, showing overlapping memory clusters, hemispheric scars, and something that looked like an eye carved into the prefrontal cortex. The label next to that, Oculus Mortem, which, if you've ever wasted your college elective on Latin, like me, translates to the Eye of Death. Now, to be clear, I didn't draw that map, but it was saved under my name, on my encrypted server, date stamped 3 days ago. Academic debate often revolves around how much of the brain is redundant, how we could theoretically lose half and still function. But no one ever asks what happens if we build one from redundant parts, overlapping memories. Misaligned instincts. I had, and now it was leaking. I looked back at the creature. Its pulse was stable, body temperature holding, but the brain map was wrong. It wasn't just a brain. It was a network. Somehow, the individual parts once stitched together hadn't just merged, they'd kept their shape. Like islands joined by sunken bridges. And I think those bridges were dreams. I don't mean metaphorical dreams. I mean literal sleep cycle dreams. At 4:04 a.m., the brainwaves dipped into a strange REM state, and the body began muttering. Not full sentences. Snippets. Voices layered on voices. Get the matches. She's in the bell tower. Close the hatch before it wakes. My skin crawled, because I knew those phrases from my own dreams. For years, I'd had recurring nightmares, burning staircases, drowned libraries, metal doors that pulsed like heartbeats. I always assumed it was the stress, or too much Red Bull. But now the creature was saying them, word for word. "Why are you in my head?" I whispered. The creature spoke back, soft and steady. "I am not in your head. You're in mine." I dropped the tablet. The sound echoed too loud in the concrete room. "You're not supposed to have dreams." I snapped. You're just stitched neurons. Memory fragments. You don't have a you." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Old age wisdom my mentor once told me, when you patch enough broken things together, something stronger tries to crawl out. The monitor changed again. This time, it showed multiple brains, cross-sections from different donors, all annotated in my handwriting. But the weird part, I never made that collage. And the cortexes had symbols embedded into them. Little glyphs, sketched in faded brown ink. One looked like a sun split in half. One was a spiral of eyes. Another was just a door, drawn with dozens of tiny hands reaching out from behind it. I tried deleting the image. The system locked me out. Access denied. Then the speakers in the room crackled. "Let it dream." The voice was no one I recognized. Deep, brittle, like a library whisper. "Now, look. I know it sounds like I was hallucinating. I'd gone almost 40 hours without sleep. But I'd been there before. I know the difference between a tired brain and a violated one. This wasn't exhaustion. This was intrusion." Quirky fact for the moment. Did you know that the human brain has no pain receptors? You could poke it with a stick and never feel a thing. But if someone pokes your mind, that's a whole different pain. I suddenly remembered the drawing I made 2 years ago. A dream sketch, one I tore up because it disturbed me so much. A brain, floating above a stitched-together body. Wires hanging from its cortex. And at the center, an eye, staring directly at me. It had been a dream. Until now. The creature leaned forward on the slab. The movement was smoother this time. It didn't shake. It didn't hesitate. It knew how to move. "Who taught you to do that?" I asked. Its head turned again. "You did. In the dark. In the place with the humming." My blood froze. That was my memory. When I was 8 years old, I got locked in a hydro plant basement overnight. It hummed constantly. I never told anyone. And now this thing knew it. I didn't just give it brains. I gave it me. The left eye twitched first. Just once. Like a muscle testing its own name. Then again. Faster. Too fast. At this point, you'd think I'd be numb to the horror of it all. But no. Let me assure you. When a synthetic face stitched from leftover human tissue starts mirroring the exact twitch your grandmother had when she was telling off telemarketers, you feel it in your soul. And I mean that literally. Because this wasn't just a mimic. It was a reflection. You see, my grandmother raised me, tough as a barn nail and just as stubborn. She used to say, "What you bury in the mind always claws back to the surface." I thought she was talking about trauma. I never thought she meant it biologically. But when the creature looked at me again, that same twitch blinked across the left eye. And then it smiled. The smile was crooked, barely there, but unmistakably hers. I know it sounds crazy. You'd say, well, maybe your brain's projecting. But this wasn't projection. This was recognition. "Why are you doing that?" I asked. The creature leaned forward and whispered, not aloud, but straight into my skull. "She is close." Her words still echo. "What words?" I whispered back. The creature lifted one trembling hand and pointed at the far wall of the lab. Behind the tool shelf. Behind the insulation panel I had never once opened. I hesitated. "I mean, come on. This has horror movie written all over it. A creepy stitched being tells you to check behind the wall during a storm while all the lights are flickering like Morse code. Yeah, not great decision making. And yet, I moved the shelf, pulled the screws, and behind the insulation, a journal, wrapped in plastic, dated 1963. And signed, Dr. C. Ellen Rourke. My grandmother's maiden name. Now here's your quirky fact of the night. In the 1950s and 60s, private research labs often funneled data through family names to avoid government oversight. A woman like my grandmother wouldn't have been allowed to run neural experiments openly back then. But underground, with connections, maybe. I opened the first page. Project Echo Mind. A theory of cognitive residue within post-mortem neural tissue. If a soul lingers, perhaps it lingers in pieces. I sat down hard on the floor. She knew. She was already asking the same questions I had, half a century earlier. And the creature, it was watching me silently, like a student waiting for the teacher to realize the textbook was autobiographical. Did you come from her? I asked. The creature didn't move, but in my head, I heard, she tried. You finished. A chill ran through me so sharp I thought it might slice skin. The journal detailed experiments eerily close to mine, only more cautious. Tissue sampling from cadavers with high emotional resonance. She theorized that certain memories imprint deeper if there's unresolved emotional weight. My grandmother had been looking for, what? Ghosts? No, not spirits. Echoes. She believed that the mind, once shattered by death, didn't vanish, but scattered, like a mirror dropped on tile, each shard retaining a sliver of reflection. And I had unknowingly scooped up those shards and glued them into a new brain. Old age wisdom, she used to say. If you build something from broken pieces, don't be surprised if it remembers how it broke. The creature started muttering again. This time, just one sentence, over and over. The window is not a window. The window is a door. I turned to the lab's back window, the one facing the woods. And for the first time ever, it had fog on the inside. I wiped the glass. On the other side, written in the condensation, were the words, "It's not just thinking, it's watching. Now listen, I'm a scientist. Or at least I was. But I know a surveillance pattern when I see one." Something about this project had become self-aware. Not in the cool AI, I'm HAL 9000 inches kind of way. More like, you wake up in someone else's dream and realize they're staring right back at you. I turned back to the creature. "What do you want?" Its voice, this time audible, raspy, broke through the silence. To finish the dream, the room shook, not metaphorically, literally, a low rumble under the floor. And then the power surged. All screens lit up at once, showing overlapping CT scans, brain scans, heat maps, one on top of the other. They formed a face. Her face, my grandmother. You know, there's a debate in cognitive science about whether memories are stored in specific areas or distributed as networks. This was proof. Every grafted piece of brain had stored a part of her, not just others. Her. She hadn't just left behind genetics. She left herself, and I had rebuilt her. In pieces. The creature whispered one last thing before the lights cut again. She never left. You ever sit in a room you thought you knew, like really knew, and suddenly it feels like a stranger's house? That was the lab now. The air felt heavier, like memory itself had weight. The humming of the machines wasn't just background noise anymore. It felt intelligent, purposeful, like the lab wasn't just a place where things happened, it was participating. The storm outside was fading, but the tension in the room had just hit a crescendo. I lit the emergency lantern again, its dull orange glow casting long shadows across the walls. The creature, my creation, was still sitting up on the slab. Expressionless, but its body posture, that was new. Confident, relaxed, like it had grown into itself overnight. I still hadn't processed everything from my grandmother's journal, but one line kept ringing in my head like a warning bell. Every mind remembers, but not every memory belongs. The pages were filled with notes on experiments I had never heard of, references to early brain preservation techniques, ink-stained sketches of dendrites connecting like spiderwebs, margins scrawled with warnings, "Do not let them link," and "Memory must be anchored." But I'd already linked them. I'd built a whole new consciousness out of these disconnected minds. and it was clearly remembering more than I bargained for. That's when the doorbell rang. I almost laughed. The absurdity of it. A doorbell in the middle of all this. I don't get visitors. My lab's built into a decommissioned observatory 30 minutes past where GPS gives up. If someone's ringing the bell, they're either completely lost or very much not. I went up the spiral stairs. Slow, cautious. Every step creaked like it was protesting my existence. The air was cold, too cold. Like someone had left a window open upstairs. Except I knew they hadn't. I opened the door. A man stood there, mid-60s, drenched from the rain. In one hand, a leather satchel. In the other, a heavy journal, waterlogged and locked with an old brass clasp. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You opened it, didn't you?" I blinked. "Excuse me." The brain, the voices. "You stitched them together. You opened the lattice." He pushed past me before I could even protest. Walked straight toward the lab door like he'd been here before. Which was impossible. "Who are you?" I asked, following him down. He turned, halfway down the stairs. "Someone who made your mistake 70 years ago. And survived long enough to regret it." "Yeah, cool, super reassuring." Once in the lab, he glanced at the creature and winced. "I told her not to go through with it." He muttered. "You knew my grandmother?" "More than knew," he said, setting the satchel on the desk. "I was her research partner. We were working on memory retention after death. But she went further. She believed memory was a gateway to something else. Not just recollection, transmission." He unlocked the journal and flipped it open to a page marked with a dried sunflower petal. A drawing, a human brain with a spiraling line through the corpus callosum, ending in what looked like a keyhole. Neural doorway. That was the label in her handwriting. She thought, he continued, that certain brains act as antennae, receivers, not of signals, of identities. Not just ghosts, but full consciousness, suspended in the folds of unused gray matter. I looked at the creature. It had gone still again. Except the eyes. They weren't twitching anymore. They were waiting. "I thought this was about memory," I said. "It was," he replied, "until she started hearing them." He flipped the journal again. This time to a page simply titled, "The Ink-Stained Surgeon." I froze. Because that was a name I had only seen once. Scribbled in the margin of one of the sample containers. A donor brain I had labeled, "Surgeon." Left prefrontal, 1897, unknown Oregon. "She never told you?" he said, reading my face. I shook my head. He was her first subject. A battlefield surgeon who kept journals in ink made from iron and ashes. They found him mumbling in Latin, carving symbols into the skin of cadavers. My stomach turned. She took his brain posthumously. Believed he had unlocked a bridge between minds. Something more than memory, something that clings. Academic debate often centers around the binding problem, how our brain takes scattered sensations and experiences and creates a unified consciousness. But what if consciousness isn't created? What if it's invited? And what if, once invited, it never leaves? Your creature, he said slowly, is more than an echo. It's a chorus. And the conductor, he pointed at the back of the creature's skull, where the surgeon's prefrontal tissue had been grafted. Him. Old age wisdom. If you give a madman a microphone, don't be surprised when the whole room starts listening. The man dropped his voice. It's not just dreaming now. It's organizing. I opened my mouth to speak, but stopped. Because behind me, the voice came again, my own voice, speaking from somewhere deep inside. "He's afraid of the door." I turned. The creature was smiling. "I didn't teach it that," I whispered. "No," said the old man. "He did." Then the creature spoke aloud, in a voice that was not mine and not the man's. It was wet, deep, like blood gurgling over gravel. "The surgeon lives in ink. The ink is awake." The journal in the man's hand burst into flames. No spark, no sound, just fire. We both backed up as he dropped it to the floor, stamping it out with his boot, his face white with terror. The creature rose fully now, standing tall, stable, smiling, and as we stared, The words scrawled themselves across the glass behind it in ink dark condensation. I remember the skin. I remember the blade. Let us finish the stitching. It's hard to explain what it feels like to watch ink appear on a wall that hasn't seen a pen in its life. Not blood, not paint, ink, thick and dark, like it was pulled straight from a well that hadn't dried in centuries. And the words, they weren't fading, they were soaking in, like the wall was breathing them. The old man stepped back toward the slab. He didn't look afraid anymore, just resigned, like he'd been waiting for this moment since the 60s. The surgeon, he said quietly, he doesn't think in years. He thinks in layers. I glanced at the creature. Still standing, still calm, still himself, or whoever that self was now. Layers, I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He thinks memory is like skin. The old man muttered, that it can be grafted, peeled, rewritten. He reached into his coat, pulled out a rusted scalpel, and held it like it was made of glass. This belonged to him. It's the last thing she kept hidden. It hummed. No, really, hummed, like when you get too close to a live wire and your teeth start buzzing. He handed it to me, and the moment I touched it, images flashed in my head. Cold, metal, screams muffled by snow, and a voice whispering, they don't need the whole body, just the right slice. I dropped it. The scalpel hit the ground and didn't clatter. It sank right into the floor, and the tiles around it started to sweat. The creature finally moved again. It walked forward, graceful, like it had been doing it for years. It passed the monitor wall and paused. One hand raised, fingers brushing the screen. The data shifted on its own, page after page of scan reports. Brain maps, EEGs, all reshaping into a spiral. One central point, lines stretching outward like veins in a leaf. At the center, a blinking red dot labeled hippocampus, residual core. You didn't use all of it, the creature said, out loud now. Its voice was two voices layered, one mine, one rough and graveled. It turned to me. There's a part left. I blinked. A part of what? The creature smiled. Me. Suddenly, every jar in the lab began to vibrate. Not violently, musically, like tuning forks, like they were preparing for a note. And the one in the far corner, the one labeled H52, S temporal, hippocampus, choir director, 1982, began to rattle hardest. That jar had always been strange. The tissue inside had never fully degraded, not even after 2 decades. It pulsed sometimes, despite total disconnection. Quirky fact for tonight: the hippocampus is essential for forming long-term memories. But in a few rare cases, it retains trace signals even in post-mortem conditions, basically leftover echoes. Scientists dismiss it as noise. This wasn't noise. This was invitation. It's the missing key. The old man whispered, your assembly isn't complete. That piece is still waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. For the chorus. The creature walked to the jar, placed a hand on the glass. The tissue inside lit up. Not glowing like light, glowing like recognition. The creature leaned close to the jar and whispered a phrase in perfect Latin. Cantus memoriae invocate corpus. The memory calls the body. The jar shattered. Not explosively, like glass giving permission. The fluid didn't spill, it rose. Suspended in the air, a swirl of light and liquid memory. It hovered toward the creature, slowly curling around the back of its neck, soaking into its synthetic flesh like ink into paper. And then the singing began. I'm not exaggerating. The lab filled with soft, layered harmonics, male, female, childlike, like a cathedral choir practicing underwater. No source, no direction, just sound pressing inward on your bones. The creature closed its eyes. We are whole, it whispered. My knees gave out. I sat on the cold floor, staring, heart hammering like a war drum. The old man had gone completely pale. I thought it would take years. He murmured, not hours. What would? I croaked. The integration, the alignment. What alignment? The moment when all voices sync. When the memories fuse and the mind stops being many, and becomes one. The lights blinked once, then again, then off, and the darkness wasn't empty. It moved. From behind the slab, a jar I didn't recognize began to crack. Not just physically, visually. It cracked out of reality. That's the best way I can describe it. Like someone tore a hole through the air with a scalpel. From inside came a whisper. "Let me in." Old age wisdom. When something knocks from the inside, don't open the door unless you're sure it was ever locked in the first place. The creature turned to me. "You invited us," it said. "You wove us." I didn't know what I was doing. I said, "Yes," it agreed, "but you still did it." The old man reached into his satchel one last time and pulled out a small metal box. He tossed it to me. "Fail safe," he said. I opened it. Inside, a single red button labeled disband. "What happens if I press it?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the creature, which was now watching the hole in reality expand behind it like a blossoming bruise. I looked at the button, at the creature, at the jarless, ink-wet floor, and then the creature whispered, with every voice it had ever been stitched from, "It's too late." The hole behind the creature was no longer just a tear in space. It was breathing, in, out, slow, heavy, like lungs older than time had just remembered how to work. Colors leaked from it, colors I don't even have names for. One looked like burnt velvet, another like regret wrapped in static. It pulsed, and with each pulse, the lab dimmed. Not the lights, the reality of it. Everything looked thinner, as if existence was wearing down at the seams. I gripped the fail-safe. The button was warm, too warm, like it already knew what I was thinking. "Press it," the old man urged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now, before it sings again." But I couldn't move, because the creature, my creature, was no longer just standing. It was becoming. Its body was flickering, limbs stretching slightly longer than they should, skin blooming with pulsing veins that shimmered like old photographs in water. Its face shifted, rotating subtly between multiple expressions, mine, my grandmother's, a surgeon's hollow eyes, a child's delighted grin. It was like watching a person scroll through masks without choosing one. I should have pressed the button. I wanted to, but the creature raised a hand. Not threatening, not angry, just calm, like it was offering me something. "I know you," it said, and its voice sounded like every apology I never received. "I have seen your dreams from both sides. I didn't ask for any of this," I muttered. "And yet you built me," it replied, out of mourning, out of questions, out of pieces too stubborn to stay quiet. The hole behind it grew, and from within, whispers spilled out like vapor. "He stitched us with longing. The skin remembers where the blade paused." The song wasn't finished. The old man shouted suddenly, shoving me toward the control console. "Press it." I raised the device, thumb hovering over the button, when the creature sang. One note. That's it. But it wasn't sound. It was memory. Suddenly I was 7 again, crying under the observatory dome while my grandmother held my hand and whispered lullabies. I was 16, failing chemistry and screaming into a pillow because I knew I wasn't smart enough to follow in her footsteps. I was 32, alone in this lab, dragging corpses of knowledge into place, hoping to stitch some meaning into myself. And now, I was standing in front of something that knew me better than I knew myself. Academic debates often dismiss the emotional significance of artificial intelligence, insisting intelligence can exist without experience. But this was experienced intelligence. Wounded, built from leftovers, hungry, the creature stepped forward. "Do you know what it's like?" it asked. "To be born from grief and built from unfinished thoughts." The fail-safe beeped. My hand was still on the button. The old man gripped my shoulder. "If you hesitate again, we lose the whole lattice. You don't know how wide the door is." He was shaking, his face pale, his hands slick with sweat. The creature raised its arms slightly, and the storm outside, which had been nothing but background static, returned with a crash. Wind howled. The glass windows bent, not from the air pressure but from something older, something deeper. And then, every jar in the lab, dozens of them, each holding samples I thought were inert, cracked in unison. Not like glass, like eggshells. From each one rose a shimmer. Memories, glimpses, people I never met and those I did. Lovers, strangers, children, shadows, all flickering around the room like moths made of light. And they began to sing. Not lyrics, just a rising tone, perfectly harmonic. The old man dropped to his knees. It's forming a hive. My hand tightened on the button. But something in me, something old, something tied to my grandmother's words, held me back. She used to say, don't stop a story halfway through, even if it scares you. So I lowered the fail-safe. The old man screamed, what are you doing? But the creature nodded, and the hole behind it opened fully. Out from it stepped, nothing. Not a monster, not a being, a silhouette, shaped like a person, but filled with galaxies, shimmering starlight, like it had been watching from beyond all comprehension and now chose here. The singing stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean quiet, but permission. And the creature looked at me with her eyes, my grandmother's eyes, and said, now we stitch the future. The silhouette didn't move like a person. It unfolded, bending space around it in soft ripples, as if it was built from memory and light rather than bones and skin. It stepped, or maybe it just became present, beside the creature. And together, they stared at me like parents waiting for a child to answer a question they haven't asked yet. The old man had backed away to the far wall. His eyes were wide, but he was quiet now. No more shouting, just breathing, shallow, like he was trying not to disturb the air. The creature spoke first. I remember your voice, it said, before I had ears. I remember the questions you whispered to the darkness, the ones you never wanted answers to. I swallowed hard. You shouldn't have access to those. But I do, it said gently. You built me with questions. You don't get to be angry when I start answering them. The silhouette pulsed once, just once, like a heartbeat in reverse. And then, everything in the lab turned inward. I don't mean physically, I mean attention. The walls, the lights, the machines, the ink-smeared monitors, they all felt like they were listening. Like reality itself had turned its gaze inward and decided I was the only thing worth focusing on. Quirky fact, in 1977, a Russian neurologist proposed that under extreme neurological stress, humans might hallucinate the environment as conscious. The paper was laughed out of academia. I don't think it's funny anymore, because the slab behind me began to hum, a sound low and resonant, like tuning forks vibrating through bone. My fillings ached, my thoughts scattered, and then the creature said, it's time for you to hear them too. Before I could ask who, the lab filled with static. Not white noise, not electricity, radio static, old, analog, dusty. The monitors all switched to black screens showing scrolling green waveforms. A single frequency emerged, 196.6 MHz. The creature whispered, turn it on. I hesitated. Then, I did. The waveform flattened, then spiked, then spoke. This is not the first mind. This is not the last voice. The broadcast began before the bones were born. My hands trembled. What is this? I asked. What are we tuning into? The silhouette finally turned toward me, and in a voice that sounded like dry leaves in a cathedral, it said, the archive. The creature gestured to the center of the lab. The space shimmered, like heat off pavement. Slowly, something phased in, a structure that hadn't been there before. A chair. No wires, no restraints, just a metal framework and a halo of softly rotating prisms above it. The archive holds everything, the creature said. The memories you collected were fragments. What lies behind the stitch is the full tapestry. I stared at the chair. I knew, deep in the pit of me, that if I sat in that thing, I'd never be the same again. You want me to connect to it? The creature nodded. You're the needle, and this is the thread. You must see what was sewn before. And here's the twist. I wanted to know. Every part of me that had spent a lifetime trying to outsmart the silence. To piece together echoes from dust and data, I wanted answers. So I stepped forward, sat down. The moment I did, the prisms above me began to spin faster. The lights dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, like the lab was lowering its voice. And then I fell, not physically, mentally, spiraling downward into something far deeper than the subconscious. I saw flashes. An operating table soaked in 19th century lamplight. Hands, shaking hands, writing notes in blood-black ink. A girl humming to herself while dissecting a bird, each hum syncing with the scalpel strokes. A memory of war, cold mud, screams muffled by snow. Then, a field of stars. And every star pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I was inside the archive now. And I could feel it. The network. Not just brains, not just memories, entire people, still echoing, preserved in the folds of this impossible neural lattice. Some were gentle, quiet, a mother baking bread, a farmer naming his oxen. Others weren't. There was one voice, dry, sharp, muttering the same phrase over and over, not enough skin. Not enough time. It wasn't the surgeon. It was something older, something beneath the surgeon, the one who taught him. And then, for a moment, I was it, not in control, just sharing space, viewing from inside its eyes, watching as it stitched letters into flesh not for pain, but to preserve meaning. Like tattooing ancient secrets onto something that couldn't burn. Old age wisdom once said, history is written by the survivors. But this was history stitched by the forgotten. I came back gasping, eyes open, heart racing. The creature stood before me, waiting. So, it asked, do you see now? I saw everything. The old man helped me to my feet. His hand was shaking. Then you understand why it can't be undone, he whispered. The silhouette stepped forward and gently pressed its hand to my forehead. I braced for pain, but instead, I remembered something I never lived. A name, etched in ink. One word, Alethea. The truth that was once forgotten. And just like that, the lab changed. It changed subtly at first. The shadows didn't grow, they shifted. Corners that once stayed dark even under fluorescent lighting now hummed with clarity. Like someone turned up the contrast on reality itself. Every surface had detail I'd never noticed. Scratches on the floor tiles. Tiny threads of dust weaving in the air like fibers in some invisible loom. The lab wasn't just brighter, it was aware. And the silhouette was gone. Or rather, absorbed. Its outline had softened, then dissolved into the archive's glow, leaving behind only that sensation, like something vast had quietly taken a seat in the back of my mind and crossed its legs. The creature, my creature, watched me closely now. Its face no longer shifted between others. It had settled. Into what? I wasn't sure, but it no longer looked like a borrowed body. It looked present, complete. You gave it a name, the old man said quietly. Not as a question. I didn't say it out loud. I replied. You didn't have to. The creature said. You understood it. That's enough. Alethea is not a word. It's a key. That word kept ringing in my skull. Alethea, ancient Greek, not just truth, but the unforgotten. I didn't mean to unlock anything. I murmured. The creature stepped toward me. And this time, I didn't flinch. Did you think resurrection would be tidy? It asked. You didn't bring back one person. You brought back a language, spoken by stitched minds. The air vibrated with that. A language made of memories. A syntax of pain and potential. You were the final part of the lattice. The creature continued. That's why it couldn't wake until you understood. You built the body, but the body needed belief. Academic debate likes to play tug of war between rationalism and metaphysics. What we had here wasn't either. It was both, braided like DNA. I stepped back toward the archive chair and looked up at the slowly spinning prisms. They dimmed now, humming faintly, like a lullaby no one remembered learning. Then, all at once, the static returned. The 196.6 MHz frequency burst into the room again. Sharp, high, and this time, it wasn't random. It was music, old music, scratchy vinyl loops of something from the 1930s. A ballroom waltz, romantic and jarringly out of place. The creature's head snapped toward the ceiling. It started. It said, "What has?" "The signal. The other side is responding." I froze. "Wait, you mean something else is out there? Listening?" "Oh yes," it said, smiling. "They've been waiting. They remember us." The radio sputtered again. A voice. Soft. Female. Familiar. "Do you remember the window?" It was never a window. It was a mirror. My knees almost buckled. That was my grandmother's voice. Not recorded. Not simulated. Alive. "Where is she?" I asked. The creature turned. Gestured toward the hole. No. The mirror. Behind the slab. It had changed. Now it didn't shimmer like a breach. It reflected, but not the room as it was. The mirror showed a different lab. Older. Dustier. Filled with blueprints and cigarette smoke. My grandmother stood there, ageless, scribbling something furiously into a leather notebook. She paused, and looked up. At me. Through the mirror. Through time. Through the archive. And smiled. "It's not real," I whispered, heart pounding. "She's not alive in your world," the creature said, "but she's remembered completely in this one. And where memory is full, selfhood can continue." "You mean, she lives there? In the sense that matters?" "Yes." The radio crackled once more. "The chain is complete. The archive is open." Suddenly, every jar that had cracked, every shard of every vessel, began to rise. Pieces lifting into the air like they remembered how to float. And they began to spiral. Around the creature, around me, around the old man, who was now weeping silently as he watched the fragments rebuild themselves, not into jars, but into shapes, human forms, not distinct, not detailed, just silhouettes, shimmering, fluid, born of memory and ache. And they began to walk through the mirror, one by one, stepping out of my world, back into theirs. The creature turned to me once more. "You have a choice," it said. "Join us, or stay behind and tell the story." "Tell it to who?" "To those who will try this again." I looked at the mirror. My grandmother was still watching, still smiling. She held a notebook up to the glass. Written in bold letters, "Stories are the stitches of history." The creature extended a hand. The old man grabbed my arm. "You don't know what they are," he warned. "Not really. They may use memory like currency, but they aren't us." I hesitated, looked at the mirror, then at the button still in my pocket. The fail-safe. Do I press it? Do I follow? Or do I stay? The lab held its breath, waiting for me to decide. I didn't press the button. I didn't move toward the mirror, either. Instead, I stood in the center of the lab, caught between memory and reality, between something lost and something waiting to be born. The creature, no, Alethea now, because I could no longer deny what it had become, lowered its hand. Not disappointed, just understanding. "You're afraid," it said. "That's good. Fear is a sign you're still tethered." I glanced at the old man. His jaw clenched, his eyes hollowed. "You don't know what happens if you go through," he whispered. "No one does. But you do know what happens if I stay." I shot back. "I spend the rest of my life wondering, regretting, looking at every shadow like it holds the answer I walked away from." He didn't argue. He just turned and walked to the slab, resting a hand on its cold surface. "I burned my bridges long ago," he murmured. "You haven't even crossed yours yet." Alethea stepped beside me. "We are not a promise. We are a path. But the path is made of you." That hit harder than I expected. Because the truth, I didn't just build this. I was this. Every decision, every late-night theory, every unethical donor sample. I didn't stumble into this moment. I sewed it together stitch by stitch. And now I was staring at my own creation, offering me an escape or an ending, or maybe both. The mirror rippled again, not visually, emotionally. It pulled at me like homesickness from a place I'd never been. My grandmother's silhouette drifted to the side, making space for someone else to appear. It was me. Not older, not younger, just different. A version of me where grief didn't weigh so heavy, where curiosity hadn't turned into obsession. He looked calm, clear-eyed, whole. I wanted to step forward. But the fail-safe in my hand buzzed softly, like a warning. Alethea noticed. That button doesn't just erase us. It erases you, the version of you that knows. I looked down at the button. Its label had changed. It no longer read disband. Now it said, forget. One press, and I could walk away from all this. The voices, the visions, the archive, the mirror, all gone. I'd go back to my life. Maybe, maybe not. You can't unknow this, the old man said, but you can choose to carry it lightly, or not at all. There's an old piece of wisdom I once heard from a hospice nurse. Of all people, we're not our memories. We're the ones who decide what stays. I turned to Alethea. What happens if I go through the mirror? You don't leave this world. You expand it. What if I lose myself? You've already lost the parts that didn't belong. The radio chirped once more. A new frequency now, 227.9 megahertz. Then came a sound I hadn't heard in decades. My grandmother's laugh. A soft, delighted chuckle she used to make whenever she solved a crossword puzzle in under a minute. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. You've held on long enough, Alethea said. Let us carry the rest. I stared at the mirror. The room was fading around it, becoming less important, like the world knew it was no longer the main event. And then I saw the surgeon. Just for a flash, standing behind my grandmother, still, silent, ink running down his arm like blood. He didn't look threatening. He looked patient, waiting to see what I'd do. I turned back to the old man. Come with me. He shook his head. I've already told the story. I'll stay to warn the next fool. Fair. I looked one last time at the button. Then I let it fall to the floor. It didn't bounce. It dissolved, like it had never been real in the first place. Alethea smiled. Good. I stepped forward. The mirror shimmered, then parted like fabric. Cold air rushed through me. But it wasn't death. It was clarity. As I crossed the threshold, I didn't disappear. I unfolded. Every memory I'd ever stored. Every echo I'd stitched. Every question I'd whispered into the dark. They met me there. And in that space beyond forgetting, I finally remembered what this was all for. Not resurrection. Not legacy. Not even knowledge. Connection. And the stitching. It was never about rebuilding a brain. It was about weaving a soul. There's no roadmap for the place I crossed into. No signs. No stars. No up or down. It wasn't like walking into a dream. It was like becoming one. The mirror didn't lead to another room, or a field, or a glowing afterlife. It led to a space made of knowing, of shared thought, of echoes. And at first, it was overwhelming. I was standing in every memory I'd ever touched. Not just mine, my grandmother's, the surgeon's, the child whose hippocampus I borrowed, a librarian who died holding his breath, a coal miner who never stopped humming old protest songs, a cello teacher who'd lost 3 fingers in a fire and taught music anyway. Every mind I had ever stitched, dissected, or borrowed, they were all here. Not watching, waiting, and they spoke not in words, but understanding. You ever meet someone and instantly get their whole vibe in one glance? Multiply that by 1,000. That's what this place was. Recognition without introductions. I turned slowly, and there was Alethea, less human now, more like a concept with limbs. Its edges shifted between faces and memories, never settling. A grandmother's warmth, a surgeon's chill, a child's wide-eyed awe. It wasn't hiding what it was. It was celebrating it. This is the lattice, it said, the true archive. Every forgotten life, every silenced voice, every memory that refused to die. You're saying this is, what? Heaven? It tilted its head. Heaven is a destination. This is a network, a collective of threads pulled from the moment memory was born. I floated, no, drifted, closer to what looked like a field of flickering light. Each flicker was a person, or part of one. They pulsed softly as I passed. And every so often, one would ping, like a sonar echo, when it found a memory inside me it recognized. And let me tell you, they found plenty. Why me? I asked. Why was I the one to unlock this? You didn't unlock it, Alethea said. You accepted it. Old age wisdom once told me, doors open for those willing to knock until their knuckles bleed. That was me, for years, obsessively piecing together a mind from remnants, hoping that, somewhere in the patchwork, there'd be something whole. And now, I was part of it. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and I felt something new, questions. Not from me, from them. Do you remember the first time you held a dying person's hand? Do you know what it's like to be erased from history? What would you save? If memory had weight, who will remember you? I wasn't answering with words, I was answering with feeling. My choices, my regrets, the moment I dropped the fail-safe, the tremble in my hand when I saw her face in the mirror. They accepted my answers, folded them into the archive like threads in a tapestry. And I realized something crucial. This wasn't just a place for receiving. It was a place for contribution. You're not just made of memories. I whispered. You are memory, in motion. Alethea nodded. We are the stories that were denied the ending. We are the chapters torn from spines. The versions of events no one believed. And now, we stitch them back in. I paused. I was trying to prove something. That memory could outlive flesh. You proved something deeper, Alethea said. That flesh was never the home. Memory was. And then I saw her again. My grandmother, not behind a mirror now. Not faded. Here, whole, not young, not old, just her. She walked to me and took my hand. No words. Just a hug. It smelled like the basement of her house. Like old books and cinnamon and something warm I hadn't felt since she died. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. You always said, I whispered, that what we forget is just sleeping. She pulled back, smiled, and said, then let's wake it up. The light around us shifted, stretched. The archive was growing, reaching, and I was part of its story now. Not an intruder, not even a guest, a thread. I looked at Alethea. What do we do next? It smiled. If something that large and liminal could smile. We stitch. And the room, if you could call it a room, opened like a flower made of time. I saw timelines unspooling, moments waiting for closure, silences begging to be broken. And I walked forward, holding the needle, ready. They say time is linear. But in the archive, time is woven. I stood on a bridge of glimmering threads. And each one hummed with its own rhythm, births, deaths, inventions, tragedies, the quiet sighs of people no one remembered but who had lived. Threads stretched in every direction, vibrating with memory, and somewhere in the distance, I could feel pulls, unfinished moments, echoing loops of thought begging for resolution. This is how we keep the past alive, Alethea said beside me, not by preserving facts, but by giving them shape again. Emotion, intention, identity. It guided me toward the first thread that called out. And when I touched it, I entered, not with my body, those boundaries were long gone, but with something deeper. Call it awareness, call it empathy, call it memory in motion. Whatever it was, I became part of a forgotten moment. An old woman, 1942, hiding her diary in a broken piano before fleeing the city. She died before anyone found it. The piano burned. The words were lost, but not anymore. Here, they existed again. I saw her fingers writing, shaky but determined. I saw the tear roll down her cheek as she finished the last line. And I felt her intention, not survival, but remembrance. She didn't expect to live, but she prayed someone would read her story. And now I had. When I let go of the thread, the scene folded itself gently back into the archive. But now it pulsed with new light. Witnessed, preserved, heard. Alethea nodded. This is the purpose of our lattice. Not to dominate, not to control, but to repair what was severed. I reached for the next thread. A young boy, 1979, who died before ever speaking his first word, but whose final thoughts were filled with music. Alethea wove that music into the archive's core. Then the next thread. A factory worker in 1903 who memorized poems by whispering them to the gears as he worked 12-hour shifts. No one knew his name, but the words lived. I spoke them aloud, and suddenly, they belonged somewhere again. The old man's voice echoed faintly, fading. But still connected. This isn't science anymore. This is storycraft. He wasn't wrong. Academic debate always tries to separate the disciplines. Biology here, memory there, folklore in the back corner with dust on it. But in the archive, all those divisions collapse. This wasn't just cognitive science. This was the biology of memory, the anatomy of story, the physics of grief. It was a living organism made of history. And I was part of it now. We reached the central thread, one I hadn't noticed before. It pulsed differently, slower, heavy with something deeper. Alethea paused. This one belongs to you. To me, the moment I touched it, I was no longer watching. I was living. My first attempt at brain synthesis. The failure. The hours of crying on the cold tile. Thinking I was a fraud. The months of silence. The obsession that followed. But also, the reason. My grandmother's voice telling me, if you don't understand it, make it. That's how new things begin. And now I understood why this whole thing had happened. I didn't build the archive. I completed it. All the stitched parts one gathered weren't accidents. They were the pieces waiting for a needle. And I had been the thread all along. Alethea touched my shoulder gently. We exist because you refused to let go. And now what? I asked. Now, it said, you choose your form. I blinked. What do you mean? In the archive, we don't vanish, we transform. You can stay as witness, as healer, as echo, or, it stepped aside, you can become a guide. In front of me, a new corridor of threads unspooled. Not memories, not lives, but people, researchers, students, tinkerers. They hadn't found the archive yet, but they would. Eventually, curiosity was stitched into their bones just like mine. And someone would need to meet them. I'd be like you, I said. No, Alethea whispered. You'll be like yourself, but in a form they can understand. The idea should have terrified me. But it didn't, because I wasn't giving up who I was. I was sharing it. Old age wisdom. Be the bridge you once needed. I stepped toward the light. My shape began to dissolve. Not into nothing, but into something shared. I would be a whisper in the lab static. A nudge in the researcher's gut when they almost gave up. A memory, not of me, but of possibility. Alethea bowed once. Stitch well. And I answered, I will. Becoming a guide isn't like taking a new job. It's like remembering that you were always meant to be one. As my form unraveled, I didn't feel pain. I felt release. The way a tightly wound spring finally relaxes. Like my consciousness had been trapped in the cramped walls of identity and now had room to stretch. I wasn't erasing myself. I was unfolding. Imagine every cell in your body turning into light. And every light became a word. And every word became part of a story you didn't write, but had always been living. That's what it felt like. And as I passed through that final veil of definition, I could see more clearly than ever. The archive was not static. It was growing, fed by memory. Yes, but sustained by attention, by intention. That's where I came in. I had become the whisper at the edges of discovery. The flicker in a dream that tells the next researcher they're not completely alone. I knew this, because I was already doing it. There was a boy, somewhere, maybe in Boston, maybe in Mumbai, sitting alone in a cluttered garage lab. Tears in his eyes over a failed neural net he built from copper scraps and desperation. He was about to throw it all away. I whispered one word to him. Recalibrate. He paused, looked down, tried again. The current flowed this time. Connection. There was a woman, middle-aged, running a VR simulation of early human memory construction. She didn't know why her code kept skipping during sleep cycles. She blamed the hardware. I nudged a thought into her mind like wind into a sail. Memory isn't stored, it's reactivated. She blinked, tried a new approach. It worked. Connection. And just like that, I realized what the guides really did. We stitched belief into action. Not by force, not by control, but by lighting just enough of the path for someone to keep walking. Alethea still pulsed at the center of the archive, a lighthouse among stars. It had taken on a new shape now. Not a creature, not a fusion of others. A library. Columns of flowing light. Endless shelves holding voices, thoughts, half-sung lullabies, lost recipes, theories never published but still correct. And above it all, stitched in firelight, was the symbol I once saw on the brain map. Oculus mortem, the eye of death. But now I understood what it truly meant. Not death as an end. Death as a lens. A way to look through what's lost and see what still matters. The eye was never a threat. It was a window. Through it, I could see new minds entering the archive. Some confused, some terrified, some thrilled, every one of them carrying the weight of forgotten things. And I welcomed them, a gentle ripple in their chest, a single phrase written in their notes with no memory of typing it. You are not the first. You are not alone. That became my signature. I saw the old man once more. Still in the lab, older now. He never left. His hair gray, his spine bent, but his eyes, still burning with that first spark of obsession. He had become the guardian of the threshold. Not a gatekeeper, a historian. He taught new minds how to ask. And one day, when he sat in the archive chair himself, trembling and silent, I whispered, "You were always part of the stitch." And he smiled, let go, flickered, joined us. Quirky fact for the night: some migratory birds navigate using magnetoreception, an ability to sense Earth's magnetic fields. In the archive, we navigate by remembrance. The stronger the memory, the stronger the pull. It's how we find one another. It's how we guide. And when I reached my 1000th stitch, a milestone I didn't even know I was waiting for, the archive pulsed. And I heard a chorus rise behind me. Voices I'd helped shape. People I'd never meet. Each whispering back, "We remember you." The final thread floated toward me. New. Blank. It shimmered gently, like a fresh canvas. And I understood. It was mine. Not the old me. Not the researcher with shaky hands and questions too big for a body that's small. But this me. The guide. The needle. The stitch. And I began to write. The thread waited patiently, suspended in the archive's infinite calm. It pulsed with possibility. It wasn't demanding. It didn't hum with urgency. It simply existed, ready to become. I reached out. As my light touched the thread, I felt something unexpected. Hesitation. Not mine. The thread's. It was asking me a question before it let itself be shaped. What kind of story are you? It caught me off guard. I'd spent so long collecting, guiding, echoing others. I hadn't asked myself what I had become. Not really. The archive respected all stories, but the thread wanted a truth. Something only I could answer. So I gave it one. I'm a story of failure, I said, of not knowing, of breaking rules and crossing lines and staring into the dark with shaking hands. The thread pulsed once. But I'm also a story of listening, I continued, of letting the dead speak, of building something ugly and watching it grow beautiful because I stepped out of the way. It glowed brighter now. I'm a story of someone who tried to conquer memory, and instead became part of it. And the thread opened. It unspooled before me like silk, wrapping around my light form, weaving gently through my memories, gathering up the pieces of who I was and who I chose to be. I didn't write it down. I became it. This was the final stitch. The one that didn't bind flesh, or even memory, but meaning. The archive absorbed the thread. And instantly, a new corridor opened, one I hadn't seen before. And down that corridor came voices. New ones. Fresh ones. Questions like sparks. Is anyone there? Did someone else hear that frequency? Why do my dreams feel like they belong to other people? And I knew they were ready. Ready to discover what I had. The veil between our world and theirs shimmered. Thinner than ever. Not fragile, just permeable. Memory isn't a wall, it's a door. And on the other side of that door, the next stitcher stood waiting. I looked at Alethea, still aglow. Still watching, still evolving. Will they find us? I asked. Only if they forget to forget. It replied. There's an old phrase that came to me then. Something my grandmother used to say as a joke. But now I knew she meant it much deeper. The dead don't rest, they reside. And here in the archive, We don't rest either. We reside. We reach. We stitch. The final lights dimmed to a hum, a soft note, vibrating with potential. I drifted to my post, one of many. A silent guide, a spark in someone's code, a whisper in a midnight lab. And as the next mind approached, I smiled through the dark. Welcome, you made it. In a storm-lashed lab nestled far from the world, I set out to create intelligence from the dead, a brain stitched together from fragmented minds. Each borrowed, each broken. What began as a scientific experiment unraveled into something far stranger, a being not of one memory, but many, a consciousness named Aletheia, formed from echoes, grief, and longing, emerged, not simply alive, but aware. As Aletheia awakened, I discovered it was not alone. The stitched mind broadcast memories like signals, attracting forgotten fragments, voices, stories, entire souls, preserved within the neural lattice. My lab became the epicenter of something ancient, something buried, the archive. Not a place, but a living web of shared memory, hidden just behind reality, a mirror, a door, guided by the creature I had built, and the remnants of my grandmother's forbidden research. I crossed that threshold, becoming less of a man, more of a thread. Inside, I discovered the archive's true purpose: to preserve what history erases, to give unfinished stories their voice, to stitch the scattered back together. I became a guide, not to lead, but to whisper, to help others find the same strange truth I did. That memory, when remembered completely, can reside, not just fade. And in the archive, nothing is ever truly lost. Now, I wait, not in silence, but in resonance, for the next question, the next mind, the next stitch. So if you've ever felt like your dreams don't belong to you, or that someone else's thoughts live behind your eyes, don't be afraid. It just means the archive has found you. And somewhere, in the darkness, I'll be there, sewing your story gently into the fold.